All right, so get ready for this one because we're diving into a story that's equal parts fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying.
Yeah, definitely fascinating.
The legend of the ghost of Hampton Court Palace.
Ooh.
And we're not talking about just your run-of-the-mill haunted house here.
Right.
This is a place packed with royal history, drama, intrigue, and some truly unsettling stories.
Yeah, and what really gets me about Hampton Court is how those ghost stories are all tangled up with the story of Catherine Howard.
Oh, totally. One of Henry VIII's wives.
Exactly.
Okay, so for anyone who needs like a quick refresher, Catherine Howard was Henry VIII's fifth wife.
That's right.
And, well, let's just say things did not end well for her.
No, they did not.
Not at all.
To put it lightly, she was accused of adultery and met a pretty brutal end.
Oh, yeah.
Beheaded at the Tower of London.
Yeah, it's a grim reminder about how life could change on a dime back then.
It really is.
Especially if you were close to power or, married to the king.
Especially then, yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Hampton Court, that wasn't just some random place she haunted.
Right.
It was her home.
It's true. And when you think about the weight of her story echoing in those halls.
It's almost like the palace itself is a character in this whole thing.
I've always thought that.
Right. It's not just a backdrop.
And the most famous spot in Hampton Court for these ghostly encounters has got to be the Haunted Gallery.
Okay, so we've got this historical backdrop. We've got Catherine Howard.
Right.
Let's get to the good stuff,
Yeah.
the ghost stories. What are people actually experiencing at Hampton Court? What have they seen or heard?
Well, the accounts are all over the place, but they're all unsettling.
Okay, good.
Some people say they've heard screams echoing through the gallery,
Yeah.
like blood-curdling screams.
See, that's the kind of stuff that gets to me.
Right.
Just imagine walking down those halls, steeped in all this history,
Yeah,
and suddenly you hear this piercing scream.
it'd be terrifying.
Totally. But why screams? Why is that such a common theme in ghost stories? And not just at a Hampton Court, I mean everywhere. Across cultures, across time periods.
It's a question that's been bugging paranormal researchers forever.
Right.
Some think screams are tied to sudden violent events.
Which would make sense with Catherine Howard.
For sure. It's like those final moments of terror are somehow imprinted on the place itself.
Wow, yeah.
Almost like an echo of that trauma.
But it also makes you think about the psychological impact of these stories, too.
Oh, absolutely.
A scream is primal, right? It evokes this instant fear.
Totally.
Even if we know it's just a story, our subconscious reacts on a different level.
It's true. You can't help but react.
Right, exactly.
And you also have to consider the power of suggestion.
Yeah.
If you visit a place like Hampton Court already expecting something spooky,
Oh, absolutely.
your mind might just interpret any weird sound as a scream, even if it's just the wind.
Or like a floorboard creaking.
Exactly.
So we've got the screams, but there are other weird things people report too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What about those cold spots? Is that just a classic ghost story thing, or could there be something more to it?
Well, like with most things paranormal, there are a few different schools of thought on that.
Okay, so break it down for us.
Okay, so on a purely scientific level, old buildings like Hampton Court, they're prone to drafts, changes in air currents, even just variations in building materials.
Right.
All that can create little pockets of cold air.
Okay, but some people think it goes beyond that.
Right. Some paranormal researchers think these cold spots could be areas where spirits are actually drawing energy from their surroundings.
Now that's creepy.
Right. It's this idea that even in death, our presence could have a physical effect on the world.
It's like a chill down your spine, but on a bigger scale.
Exactly. It really makes you wonder.
So we've got screams, we've got cold spots.
Right.
The sources also mention some visitors feel like they're being watched, this like sense of unease, especially in the haunted gallery.
And this is where things get really interesting because now we're talking about human intuition. That possibility that some people are just more sensitive to these things.
You mean sensitive to energy or like a presence?
Exactly. Could it be that some of us can sense those shifts or even the presence of spirits in a way that others can't?
I mean, it's a fascinating question, but couldn't you also explain that with psychology? If you go in expecting to feel creeped out, your mind's going to play tricks on you, right?
For sure. For sure. Our minds are great at filling in the blanks, especially when we're dealing with the unknown.
So we've got the setting, we've got Catherine Howard, we've got these creepy experiences, the screams, the cold spots, the feeling of being watched.
Right.
But the sources mention something else that's pretty wild. Catherine Howard might not be the only restless spirit at Hampton Court.
Like the stories suggest there might be others with unfinished business roaming around those halls.
Okay, so who else could be lurking in the shadows at Hampton Court?
Well, we'll get into that, but first.
So Hampton Court is basically a ghost story factory.
You could say that, yeah.
And you said Catherine Howard might not be the only one with unfinished business there.
Definitely not.
So who else is rumored to haunt these halls?
Well, one of the more famous ghosts is another one of Henry VIII's wives, Jane Seymour.
Oh, right, Jane Seymour. She's one of the more memorable ones, even without the ghost stories.
Right.
She's the one who finally gave Henry a son.
Yeah. She gave him the son he always wanted, but even that was touched by tragedy.
Yeah, she died at Hampton Court right after giving birth.
Imagine the mix of emotions in those rooms.
It really makes you think maybe those intense emotions just kind of stick around,
Ooh, that's interesting.
like an echo long after the people are gone.
It's a compelling thought.
Mm.
And there are actually a lot of stories about Jane Seymour that focus on those rooms where she spent her last days.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. Some people say they feel a sense of peace in those rooms. Others have said they've seen a woman in white, sometimes holding a baby.
See, that's what gets me. Those details that connect back to the person's life or their death. I mean,
Oh,
footsteps in an old house, that's one thing.
right?
But when you get those personal details, it just hits different.
It really makes you question what's real and what's imagined.
It's those details that make you wonder if it's really just, energy or if it's something more like consciousness.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, but we can't forget about Henry VIII himself.
Oh, no, he's got to be in the mix.
He's got to be part of these ghost stories too, right?
Oh, yeah, Henry VIII. Such a larger-than-life figure,
For sure.
both in life and apparently in the afterlife, too.
Of course, of course.
People have reported seeing his figure around the palace, especially where he used to hold court.
Makes sense.
Some people even say they've heard his voice.
You know what they say about big personalities?
What's that?
They leave a mark.
I guess even ghost form, Henry VIII wasn't one to be ignored.
Not at all. So we've got Catherine Howard, we've got Jane Seymour, we've got Henry VIII.
Right, a real party.
But what about those more general, unexplained things that people report?
You mean like the classic haunting stuff?
Yeah, like footsteps, shadows, things moving on their own.
Right, those are harder to pin on anyone specific.
Right, but they add to the overall creepiness.
They do, they create that atmosphere of mystery.
It's like, have you ever been in a really old house and just felt like someone's watching you?
Oh, all the time.
Or like you're hearing whispers, but you can't quite make them out?
It's almost like you can feel the past all around you.
Exactly.
And it's those whispers, those unexplained things that make the best ghost stories.
Because you can't explain them away.
It leaves room for your imagination to run wild.
Which brings us back to that back and forth between skepticism and belief.
Right, that's the heart of it all.
On the one hand, you've got perfectly good explanations for some of this stuff.
Drafts, creaky floorboards.
The power of suggestion, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But then you have those experiences that just defy explanation,
Yeah.
Stuff that makes you question everything.
And that's where it gets really interesting, that liminal space
Yeah.
between what we know and what we don't.
You get that chill down your spine because you realize maybe we don't know as much as we think we do.
Maybe some things are just beyond our understanding.
Okay, so let's say, just for fun, that there's something to these ghost stories.
Okay.
What is it about Hampton Court that would make it such a magnet for this stuff?
Well, first, you've got to consider the history. We're not talking about some ordinary place. This is where kings and queens lived, where love, betrayal, intrigue, all that drama played out in a big way.
And tragedy, too.
Oh, yeah, tons of tragedy. It's almost as if those events, those emotions, they just seeped into the walls.
Like a psychic sponge.
Yes, exactly. And some researchers believe those emotions can stick around and influence the people who visit today.
Especially if they're sensitive to it.
Right, exactly.
It's a lot for one building to hold. All those joys and sorrows,
It is centuries of it.
Centuries, yeah.
And then you also have to think about the building itself.
What do you mean?
The architecture, Hampton Court. It's like a maze with its long corridors, secret passageways, sprawling grounds.
You're saying it's easy to get turned around in there.
Both literally and figuratively.
Ooh, I like
You
that.
can lose yourself in there. And that sense of disorientation, it can make people more susceptible to suggestion.
Like, more likely to see a ghost
Yeah.
because they're already a little uneasy.
Exactly. All of those factors combined.
The history, the emotions, the architecture.
They create an environment where it's easy to blur the lines between what's real and what's imagined.
Which makes me wonder how much what people experience is influenced by what they already believe.
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right. Like, if we're told a place is haunted, are we more likely to see a ghost even if it's not really there?
How do you separate real experiences from the power of suggestion? It's tricky.
It's like, how do you know if you're seeing a ghost or if you're just projecting your own fears onto the environment?
Right. It's tough.
It's a tough one for sure.
It is.
But that's something we can unpack a bit more later. For now, I want to shift gears a little and talk about the historical context because Hampton Court isn't unique, right?
Definitely not.
There are haunted castles and spooky stories all over England, especially from that Tudor period.
Right. It was a spooky time.
Why do you think that is? What was it about that specific time period that got people so into ghost stories?
Okay, so we've been talking about haunted Hampton Court, but like you said, it wasn't just this one palace.
Right.
The Tudor era in England, it's like a gold mine of ghost stories.
It really is, yeah.
What was it about that time period that made those kinds of stories so popular?
It's interesting, right? When you look back at history, you see this pattern.
What's that?
Times of big upheaval, lots of change.
Okay.
They tend to have a lot more stories about the supernatural.
Makes you think.
And the Tudor period was definitely a time of huge change, tons of uncertainty.
Okay, so what were some of those specific factors at play?
Well, for one thing, you had the English Reformation.
Oh, right. I mean, that was a time of huge religious upheaval.
Henry VIII breaking from the Catholic Church.
Exactly. Monasteries being dissolved, people's entire belief systems being challenged.
People must have been freaking out.
They were. Imagine that. Your whole world is being turned upside down.
Right.
The line between the earthly and spiritual is blurred.
Totally.
It's no wonder people started seeing ghosts around every corner.
It's like when your sense of security is shaken up, you start looking for signs everywhere.
Exactly. And sometimes you see what you're afraid of seeing.
And in this case, what they were afraid of were ghosts.
Among other things, yeah. Don't forget about the political climate back then either.
Oh, right.
The Tudor court was a dangerous place to be.
So much intrigue.
Exactly. Plots, betrayals, executions, you name it.
Talk about a recipe for restless spirits.
Right. And remember, this was all happening within the walls of places like Hampton Court.
So it all gets intertwined, the history and the ghost stories.
Exactly. It's easy to see how people would connect the dots.
So Catherine Howard's story,
Yeah.
it's not just about her. It's about the anxieties of that whole era.
Absolutely. Her tragic fate, it becomes a symbol for the fears of that time.
The fear of betrayal, the fear of sudden death.
Exactly.
And those themes, they still resonate with people today.
They do. That's the power of a good ghost story.
Right. They're not just about spooky encounters.
It's about our deepest fears, our fascination with what we don't understand,
It's about trying to make sense of the world, even the scary parts.
and maybe finding a connection to something bigger than ourselves.
So it's like these stories, they're a bridge between the past and the present.
In a way, yeah, they connect us to something larger.
Which brings us back to Hampton Court.
Full circle.
Even if you don't believe in ghosts, you can't deny the power of those stories.
That's right. And those stories, they shape how we see things.
What we feel, maybe even what we see.
Exactly.
So next time you're in an old house or a historic castle,
Or even just listening to a spooky story.
pay attention to those chills, those moments where your heart skips a beat.
Because maybe, just maybe, it's more than just a story.
Maybe it's a glimpse into another world.
A message from the past. Or even just a reflection of your own deepest fears.
And who knows, it could be all of those things at once.
That's the beauty of it all, isn't it?
It keeps us guessing, keeps us wondering.
And hopefully it keeps us coming back for more.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you with this.
Okay.
If ghosts really are drawn to places with powerful emotions, where tragedies happened, where history left its mark,
Then what stories will the places you inhabit tell in the years to come?
think about it.